Alright, before you start soldering, you want to plug the soldering iron in and let it warm up for probably a good 10 minutes. Before you start soldering, it's always a good idea to just take a little bit of solder and just touch the end of the soldering iron to coat it so that it can warm up. It'll help the transfer of solder from the resin core to whatever you're soldering. It's a good idea not to have anything touching the wire within a close area of where you're going to solder, because it'll pull heat out, and the more heat you can keep in the wire, the quicker the solder will go and the better it's going to flow. If your soldering iron is sufficiently heated up, you should only need to really touch the wire in one spot. You want to put it there, put your soldering iron on. You want to use the tip pretty much as the only soldering surface. Just let it sit there for a little bit. It'll start to warm the wire up, and if you do it properly, you should only need to just run the length of the solder down the wire and it should melt in. So it's still transferring heat. It's not ready because it won't melt the solder yet. So this is a heavier gauge wire. It's 14. Most of the stuff in this car is usually 18 or 20 gauge. It'll solder really quick. It'll hold really well. I stepped up to 14 gauge wire because I was lengthening a lot of this stuff when I was doing my wire tuck. So as you can see, I mean, I'm not even touching where the soldering iron is, and the solder is flowing into it. What you want to do is you want to solder so that you have the maximum heat. You want it to be a shiny silver color while you're soldering. If it looks dull or cloudy, it's going to be a bad connection. And that's because it's not really melting the solder. And a lot of people go minimal amount of solder. I like to go overkill. I like to make sure that the whole thing is soldered all the way through. And the main reason isn't even for the electrical aspect of it being a bad connection, because honestly, just twisting the wires together is good enough for 90% of the stuff in the car. It's more for strength to help keep it from pulling apart and from the wires corroding. So this is a 90% silver bearing solder. You can get it from Radio Shack, Walmart, Home Depot, pretty much anywhere. It's a universal product, so any of them will do. You just want to make sure it has a high silver content. The higher the silver content, the better the transfer of electricity will be. So, and that's pretty much all there is to it. You saw how quick it soldered, and I mean, you can see on the bottom the solder went all the way through. If you want to draw it through some more, you can just move the soldering iron around and the heat itself will pull it through. But since this is just a demo, I'm not worried about it being perfect, but within seconds of it being done, it's not going to pull apart. As far as treating the outside of this once you're done, you can do a couple different things. You could heat shrink tube it, you could electric tape it, there's brush on like a liquid electric tape. I prefer just good old-fashioned regular electric tape, because if you do need to open up the connection again to resolder it, or if you want to splice in another connection or something like that, you can without going through a ton of extra work. With regular electric tape, I usually start at about a ½ inch before, and I'll wrap it fully around and stop at a ½ inch after. And that's just more to not protect the joint, but just to keep anything from touching it and ground it out, because as you can see, there are still wire points poking out, and I mean, you don't need a power wire to touch the body and ground out your whole electric system and fry something. But that's pretty much all there is to soldering. And I mean, the only difference is as you go to a larger and larger gauge wire, you need more and more heat, and just one of the regular, you know, cheesy $10 Radio Shack soldering irons aren't going to be able to put out enough heat. You'd have to go with like a higher duty loop style soldering iron. Honestly, nothing in this car would need that. When I redid the main engine wiring harness, there was absolutely nothing in that wiring harness that needed to be soldered with a heavier duty soldering iron. So I really don't think you would need it, and honestly it's kind of overkill to do that. But there's the joint. It's all done. Most of the wires in this car are like 20 gauge. It'll solder in a couple seconds. It's real fast. Doesn't take a lot of heat. Big thing is don't grab the wire anywhere near the solder after you do it. One, the rubber on the wire is going to be soft because it does absorb heat, and two, the wire itself is going to be hot as can be. That's pretty much it. This is the solder that I use. It's just high silver bearing solder, so it has good transfer. If you want to, you can get an ohm meter and put it on there and check the resistance on the wire before and after the solder to make sure that it's good. And honestly, by twisting the wire and soldering it like that, usually there's no drop in continuity on the wire. If you were going to do like a wire tuck and you wanted to lengthen the wire, that's a different story, because then you might want to step up a gauge to help with voltage drop over distance. But from moving my underhood fuse box from the right next to the ABS pump all the way back into the cab of the car, I didn't see any voltage drop with using the same gauge wire. Usually it's about a run of 20 feet before you'll start seeing a major voltage drop where it would cause any kind of issues in a car. But that's pretty much it. That's all you have to do to solder. Other than that, I mean, practice a little bit if you're nervous about it, but I had never really soldered any wires before I decided to do my wire tuck, so I just did a little bit of background research and I went at it. So, good luck, man. I'll send that plug over to you. Thanks.